It only takes a moment for everything to change, even though you might think that every day is the same. You get up, you go to work, run errands, meet friends, come back home, eat, sleep, repeat. But it takes just a minute, even 1 second, for things to completely turn around. And then nothing's the same again. And for once, you miss that cyclic and predictable routine of your life. Well, this is exactly what happened to the Barry family when 21-year-old James Barry was found viciously attacked in his own home. What started as a peaceful family dinner turned into the most traumatizing night of everyone's lives. It goes to show how one single thing can completely change the course of your life, or even end it. The tragic case of James Barry is unfathomably terrible because the emotion that drove the perpetrator to steal the life of James was something a lot of people go through, and that was simple hurt and maybe a little anger. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you're interested in that kind of thing and you like what you see, hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost a thing and it just keeps you up to date with all of my latest videos. James Nicholas Barry was born on May 28th of 1995 in Wellington, Florida, to his parents Nicola and James Barry. He also had an older sister named Alexandra. Growing up, James was defined as gentle, shy, and kind. He had a small group of friends and he was super close to his family. But he wasn't as outgoing or unpredictable as some other kids may have been. James and his sister Alexandra were the best of friends, and the two spent most of their time at home surrounded by their animals. The Barry family had 5 horses, 5 dogs, and 5 cats, so it's safe to say they were animal lovers through and through. According to Alexandra, James was a good kid who never put himself in dangerous situations or ever really got into trouble. He was a pretty well-mannered kid, and he'd spend most of his time outside with his best friend playing tag, catching frogs and tadpoles, and living just a normal childhood. But in 2002, when James was just 7 years old, unfortunately his parents split up. Nicola and James asked the kids who they wanted to live with, which, by the way, please never ever do this. This is not the responsibility of a young child to make choices between his two parents. It's incredibly damaging and honestly just irresponsible. But anyway, James decided to live with his mom and Alexandra decided to live with her dad, cutting the family clean in half. In spite of this, James learned to be very responsible and a kind and compassionate young man. He even took care of his mom, who was unfortunately diagnosed with breast cancer at one point. It was a very difficult time for Nicola and for the rest of the Barry family, but together they pulled through and Nicola made it out of this terrible phase of her life with her son by her side. Eventually, James's mom began dating a man named Guy Hand, and James Sr. went on to marry another woman named Tricia. But even though the family dynamic had changed completely, the Barry family was still pretty close by the end of it all. In his teen years, James wasn't a popular kid in school. His only escape was playing video games, which was one of the many things he and Alexandra did together. While Alexandra stopped playing games as she got older, James was still deeply in love with the hobby all throughout his life. But even though James spent the majority of his time home alone, he soon met someone special, and her name was Melanie Aim. And she was a fellow gamer as well as a student at Seminole Ridge Community High School, the same school that James went to. The two immediately clicked, and what started as a friendship turned into something more. Melanie's parents were originally from Cambodia, and she also had extended family in Maryland. Melanie was also very shy and extremely soft-spoken, the kind of person where you have to lean in a little closer to hear them properly. That's the type of person Melanie was. But this aside, Melanie, as soon as she started dating James, became like a member of the Barry family. Everyone was extremely happy for James. This was his first serious relationship, and meeting Melanie also brought James out of his shell a little bit. He seemed more confident and comfortable in his own skin, and even James's friends and family noticed the pleasant change. Melanie would spend holidays like Christmas, Thanksgiving, and the like with the Barry family, and James's mom, Nicola, had good things to say about her, pretty much exclusively. James and Melanie completed each other, and they were head over heels for each other. Before long, James graduated high school and enrolled in Palm Beach State College. Melanie soon got her GED, and it's said that she then headed to Palm Beach to be closer to him. By the time he was 21, James was living in Loxahatchee, Florida, and working part-time, and overall he was doing very well for himself, surrounded by people that he loved. But all of this was about to change. November 16th of 2016 was the day when the Berry family was getting ready for dinner. James also invited Melanie, and things had gone pretty well. The family got together, chatted, ate some delicious food, and just savored the company. Fast forward to 12:52 a.m. on November 17th, and 911 received a frantic phone call from Nicola, James's mom. Nicola was very distressed over the phone, and she was repeatedly heard saying that her son was bleeding heavily on the floor of their home. Paramedics were dispatched, and when they arrived at the scene, they walked into what could only be described as a gruesome nightmare. Everywhere the paramedics looked, it was covered in red. From the hallway to the front door to the ground leading into the house, it was a mess, like a scene out of a horror movie. When paramedics approached James's bedroom, the sight before them was heartbreaking. James's mom, Nicola, her boyfriend Guy, and James's best friend Jeff were all on the floor trying to help James, but it wasn't working. Tragically, 21-year-old James could not be saved. We all hope to lose our lives one day, surrounded by the people we love most. But a scene like this is never what any of us have in mind. This was awful. The police were soon called to the scene because the wounds that James had were consistent with someone attacking James with a sharp object. While the detectives were trying to figure out what had actually happened to him, the news of James's death traveled fast. His sister Alexandra was notified by Nicola, and she was completely blindsided by the news. The whole situation just kept going from bad to worse with each and every phone call the family made. Meanwhile, the police scoped the area and tried to find something, anything, that could explain what had happened to James and who had done it. Luckily, the detectives were able to find a suspicious weapon on the kitchen countertop. It was a long, curved, sharpened knife, and from the looks of it, it looked to be the weapon that was used to end James's life. But the police couldn't catch the perpetrator with just the murder weapon alone. So they had no choice but to question the people inside the house first. In their minds, anyone could be a suspect. From James's best friend to his own mother, everyone was on the police's radar. The first person the detectives talked to was James's best friend, Jeff. They soon learned that Jeff was living with James at the time. Jeff recounted the events from a few hours before, and it was traumatizing for him to say the least. Jeff remembered going to sleep at about 10 p.m. that night after having dinner at the Berry house. James was playing video games at that time, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But all of a sudden, after a few hours, James woke Jeff up and said something along the lines of, "I think it's over." James was still very groggy, and he barely even remembers the conversation, but he told James to just go back to sleep, which he did. Sometime later, all Jeff heard was a loud bang that caused him to get up and go into James's bedroom, and that was when he saw the horrific scene. But Jeff recalled a very crucial detail about the murder weapon. He said that he saw the knife on the floor right next to where he'd found James. But if you remember, investigators found the knife in the kitchen. So how did the knife teleport from the bedroom to the kitchen? Where was the knife originally, and who had picked it up? This was all very confusing for the police. Well, the next person in line was Nicola, and she was just obviously completely broken and emotional and traumatized. I can't imagine the confusing mixture of feelings that she had to have been dealing with, because all of this happened so quickly and without any warning whatsoever. One minute you're sharing an amazing meal with your family, and the next your family's completely ruined. But after getting Jeff's and Nicola's stories straight, the police talked with Nicola's boyfriend, Guy, who was one of the people who was trying to save James. He was also very shaken and emotional. His story also matched with what the rest of the house had to say, but he admitted to something else. Guy was the one who picked up the knife from the bedroom and took it to the kitchen, but it wasn't because of malicious intent. Guy said that the knife was just out in the open, and he was scared that anyone in a moment of panic could have stepped on it to injure themselves. So he removed the knife from the path and placed it in the kitchen on the countertop and got to work saving James. It wasn't the most ideal thing to do, but Guy didn't tamper with the scene intentionally. I mean, it was pure chaos in there, and all of us can do things without thinking. The police also scanned Guy's body language and tone, and he looked genuinely and equally traumatized as the rest of the people in the house who witnessed this scene. But now that that was out of the way, the investigators made their way back towards the porch, and there they saw something. On a table, there was an unattended phone with a pink case. Naturally, it looked like a woman's phone, but it wasn't Nicola's. As the police were trying to figure out whose phone this was, they were distracted by the sound of a car pulling up in the driveway, and a woman got out. She looked close to Nicola's age, and she was looking for her daughter, whom she hadn't seen all night long. The investigators were so confused at that point that Nicola, Jeff, and Guy filled them in. The woman was none other than Melanie's mom, and the phone also belonged to Melanie, James's girlfriend. The police then put two and two together, and they now knew that besides the three people and James, Melanie was also invited to dinner. But where was she now? And why did she leave her phone? Was she in trouble? And was Melanie also attacked and in danger at that moment? The investigators had a lot of questions going through their minds, but when they talked to James's best friend Jeff again, he had news for the police. For some context, James moved into the Berries' home sometime around 2014. So James and Jeff were best friends turned roommates. This also meant that Jeff was a close witness to James and Melanie's relationship. Jeff, even though he was over the moon for James to be in a relationship, he immediately noticed that Melanie was strangely clingy. She wanted to control James, and they obviously fought a lot because of this. She wanted to be everywhere James went, hence her dropping out of high school and getting a GED and following James to college near Palm Beach. Even if James didn't invite Melanie to certain family events or even to hang out with his friends, Melanie would get furious and guilt-trip James into letting her join. Jeff had talked to James about Melanie's volatile, unstable, and bizarre behavior, but James didn't budge. Melanie was his first love, and he was blind to all the obvious and dangerous red flags. But one very significant event led James to take off the rose-colored glasses and see Melanie for who she was. See, in one of the countless fights with James, Melanie had enough, so she decided to get back at James twice as hard. So we all know that James loved animals. Well, he had a very expensive saltwater aquarium in his house filled with fish, and Melanie, in a fit of rage, poisoned the water, causing all of James's fish to die. This was a new low for Melanie. She'd been petty before, but this was so far past petty. This was downright cold-hearted. This even led to James finally breaking up with Melanie. I mean, heck, Melanie had just killed a dozen pet fish with a straight face and zero remorse. I don't know what Melanie was expecting after committing such a heartless and heinous act, but James to immediately break up with her. But Melanie acted surprised somehow? I don't know how someone could do something like this and not expect there to be consequences, but she did. Melanie wasn't going to let James go easily, though, and she vowed to get back together with him no matter what the cost. Well, even though James had broken up with Melanie, that didn't stop her from trying to get back together with him, and Melanie used every trick in the book, even threatening to harm herself if she and James didn't get back together. This was such an exhausting back and forth for James. Melanie was obsessed with him, and in her mind, he was hers and hers alone. Melanie's family even tried to control her behavior by letting her stay in Maryland for a bit, and during that time, James was finally free of the suffocating relationship with Melanie. But as much as I want to say that it stayed that way, it sadly didn't. 3 months before the fatal attack on James in August of 2016, James and Melanie were back together. Don't ask me how or why, they just were. According to Alexandra, this news was a shock to everyone. Alexandra genuinely believed that James loved Melanie and he wanted to make things work with her. And it just goes to show how understanding James really was. He wanted to give Melanie another chance, even after all that she had done. But this would prove to be a mistake, and one that would eventually cost James his life. Even James's dad, James Sr., came forward to the police and revealed a text message conversation between the father and son on the night of the murder. James was seen telling his dad that he would break up with Melanie, and his dad was supportive of whatever decision he made. But speaking of phones, James's phone was also checked, and on a gaming app, there was a conversation between him and Melanie, and it was a breakup conversation. James had broken up with Melanie over text, and she was very angry, upset, and filled with rage. After hearing all of this, the detectives wanted to track down Melanie because she was almost certainly the person behind James's death. But the main question was, where was Melanie now? The investigators were searching all over Palm Beach. They also asked neighbors if they saw anything weird on the night of the crime. Luckily, one neighbor came forward with CCTV footage, and it showed a white Toyota speeding away from James's home just before that 911 call was made. When the footage was reviewed again, the car was seen pulling up in front of James's home minutes before the murder took place, and this white car was obviously Melanie's. So the detectives put up a statewide BOLO for Melanie and her car. Well, within no time, the police got a significant lead. Witnesses saw that same white Toyota going to Turnpike Plaza almost an hour after the murder. It was clear to the detectives by now that Melanie was trying to make a run for it. And where would she go other than Maryland? This was corroborated when Melanie's credit card activity led straight to Maryland. Finally, the investigators knew where Melanie was, and they came up with a plan to go and talk to her. Because Melanie was a flight risk, the detectives didn't want to just corner her yet. They wanted a confession out of Melanie to prove her involvement in James's heinous murder. When the police got to Melanie's cousin's home in Maryland, they were able to quickly locate Melanie's car, which was just out in the driveway. This confirmed that Melanie was indeed there. When the detectives knocked on the door, initially Melanie's cousin came out and they talked for a bit. Minutes later, Melanie walked out and she looked nervous. Her hands would sometimes be crossed or flailing everywhere, and she had a barely audible voice. But she immediately put herself in hot water when she asked the police, "I'm just wondering when I should go in for the questioning." Now, this was odd for the investigators to hear because they hadn't disclosed why they were even there. What happened to James was never brought up. If that wasn't enough, Melanie also asked the detectives if she needed a lawyer, even though she wasn't under arrest or being charged for anything. The Maryland Police Department kept an eye on Melanie while Florida detectives were making the drive up to Maryland. When the Florida detectives arrived on November 18th, they had a strategy. They weren't arresting Melanie straight away. They still wanted that confession out of her first. They wanted to appear as non-threatening to Melanie as possible so that she wouldn't try to run away again. So Florida detectives began asking Melanie a bunch of questions in her own home, under the impression of getting her side of the story. The investigators were good at this because, in no time, Melanie spilled everything. So remember when James sent that text on the gaming app, breaking up with Melanie? Well, Melanie was very upset, and obviously so. But after she spent multiple hours reportedly sobbing uncontrollably, her sadness morphed into anger, and something compelled Melanie to go and confront James about the breakup. So she made the drive to James's house, and that was when things in Melanie's mind turned dark. She couldn't imagine James breaking up with her, and the last straw for her was when she heard that James didn't love her anymore, as he told her this in person. Well, Melanie simply couldn't handle being rejected, so she immediately picked up a kitchen knife from the drawer and launched a horrific and brutal attack on James. The struggle went from the kitchen to the hallway and up to James's bedroom, where Melanie fatally attacked James, then left him for dead. Melanie also voluntarily provided the clothes that she was wearing when she attacked James. Now, at this point, the police had simply asked to see the clothing that she'd been wearing on the day that she and James had the argument. But Melanie openly handed them to the police, allowing them to keep them. This was just so bizarre. She was so forthcoming with information and evidence, yet she'd just run away to Maryland. It didn't make any sense. Why spend the effort running if you're just gonna come clean immediately? With all of the information, the detectives left Melanie's home, but not for long. The next day at 8:30 a.m., Melanie Im was arrested for the second-degree murder of her ex-boyfriend, James Barry. She was extradited from Maryland and brought back to Florida to face the consequences of her actions. Things seemed pretty streamlined for the police. They had their suspect in handcuffs, and soon justice would be served. But there were a couple of things that went down before the trial. First of all, a pre-trial motion was filed by Melanie's defense team. The defense claimed that Melanie's confession shouldn't be included in the trial because the detectives wrongfully coerced the confession out of her, even when she'd simply asked for an attorney. That too, 3 different times. But again, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, she wasn't arrested at the time that this took place. She was not in handcuffs. She was not even detained. She was questioned in her own home and offered all this information willingly to the police. The confession was the only rock-solid and direct piece of evidence that Melanie was the one who'd committed the crime. Other than that, the rest of the evidence could be considered circumstantial, which would ruin any chances of a conviction. It took the judge a month to come to a decision, and ultimately, the defense's motion was kicked to the curb. Melanie's confession was going to be part of the trial. Melanie's trial finally began in 2018, and the prosecution presented their arguments. They painted Melanie as a volatile, controlling, manipulative, and obsessive woman who wanted James all to herself. And when she realized that James was slipping away, she did the unthinkable, punishing the entire Barry family for life with this tremendous loss. The defense, on the other hand, tried to pin James's murder on none other than Guy and Nicola, since Guy was the one who picked up the murder weapon, which looked suspicious, admittedly. The defense argued that Guy was the perpetrator and Nicola was an accomplice, which is unbelievable if you ask me. But after 2 days of deliberation, the jury unfortunately couldn't reach a unanimous decision, which was frustrating for everyone. But to make Melanie face the law, the state booked a second trial. And the second trial was held in September of 2018. And after the same arguments, finally, the jury delivered the verdict. Melanie was found guilty of second-degree murder and was sentenced to the maximum penalty of 50 years in prison. It took almost 2 years, 2 trials, and a lot of twists and turns to get justice for James, but finally it was all over. The Barry family had suffered unimaginable trauma. Not only did they lose their loving and gentle and kind son, but his mom was accused of being an accomplice in his murder in the midst of all this. This is a different level of heartbreak and hurt. James lost his life because Melanie didn't want to break up with him. Melanie couldn't bear that James would ever reject her, and that led to her losing all control, and things ended tragically. According to Alexandra, no one in the Barry family will ever be the same. They're traumatized for life. Even though justice is served, 50 years is not long enough to take the trauma, the hurt, and the nightmare away. Rejection hurts a lot. It can be the end of the world for many people, but resorting to taking revenge on someone who doesn't feel the same way about you is not only unreasonable, but it never ends well. Letting our emotions take the front seat in situations like these, it's a detrimental mistake. Breakups are heartbreaking, and yes, they're unbelievably painful, but it's something that happens to almost everyone out there at some point in their lives. But what's not normal is perpetually ruining or ending someone's life, all in the name of revenge. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Miss Nova05 and Jessel Bukassis. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it's a great way to support the channel and help out, and I really appreciate all of you guys that have decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also available now, and you can grab one of those from the link down in the description as well. But as always, if you like this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.